So do role-playing games need to be in person anymore? Given the power of virtual and given how things have shifted, are there unique opportunities? And as a perfect example, Alien the RPG, an excellent, amazing system and a relatively new role-playing game. The system has a lot of unique features. You could literally take it and port it over to any other narrative and it would work so well. But when combined with the Alien narrative, it's a very interesting and amazing sandbox to play in. And if you've been following my vlogs and my blog for any amount of time, you know that you mentioned Hero Quest, I'm in. I don't need to see it. Talisman, I'm in. I don't need to see it. Space Marine, sold. Conan, I'm ready. Aliens, or Aliens versus Predator, I'm ready to go. So when it was announced and rolled out that there's a role-playing game, I immediately jumped on this. And I've had the good fortune to run a number of cinematic adventures. That's their kind of terminology for a one-off game. In addition to running one campaign. And I'm currently writing 2 other campaigns just to explore the narrative and explore the sandbox and play in that universe. But what's interesting about the game, finding players. Now, in the ecosystem, Dungeons & Dragons is king. And we explored this a couple of vlogs back, pushed that up to the D&D channel. I think that's a good thing. Dungeons & Dragons is a universal RPG language that you can understand, that you can play. Fantastic community. I'm playing 2 D&D games right now. I like to run D&D games. I'm not going anywhere with Dungeons & Dragons. But as soon as you get into more nuanced or obscure systems, Invisible Sun as a perfect example, the idea of finding players becomes a lot more challenging. On top of already the challenges of finding a group, scheduling a group, especially if you play in a store or part of a gaming club, space could be at a premium. You can't always control the environment. Sometimes there's delays. And of course, rightly so, you're dealing with other gaming enthusiasts that might be role players or might be wargamers or playing card games. So in that mix, even in a physical scenario setup, there's challenges. There's things to navigate. When we jump to virtual, and certainly the duality of the RPG tools becoming more proficient, 3D maps and tokens and effects, but also the tech is kind of standard on your phone, on your laptop, on your tablet, and the comfort that players have playing virtually. Now, I used to be of the feeling, the ideal. You know, we go into an experience, whether it's a war game or a role-playing game. What's the ideal? I always thought that ideal was face-to-face, and I still enjoy playing tabletop to tabletop because as a GM or as a player, you can pick up on certain cues. There's not delays. The physical interactions that we have as social creatures we pick up on, sometimes those get filtered over non-tabletop, going virtual. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge more and more that there are some advantages to playing virtual when it's done correctly. Obviously, as a player, if I'm in a busy spot, or one game we had a player in their car driving, right? That's a different setup, but they weren't driving. They were in the passenger as the car. But this idea that if I'm in my own space and it's quiet and it's well lit, sometimes there are less distractions. And I find myself as a dungeon master, as a game master, as an overlord, whatever we want to call it, adapting and learning my skills to this virtual environment. And the advantage that I have is the fact that now, not only the convenience of scheduling, it becomes much easier, not only the fact that we can technically play longer. I used to have to book in and say to myself, all right, as a DM, I need an hour to arrive, commute time, prep time, setup time. Give myself a little bit of room. And this example I'm thinking of is about like 30 minutes or so, 35 minutes, 40 minutes away from the store to play. And then I want to allow an hour time commute home, both to set things up, to break things down, maybe answer some questions, maybe do a quick level up, and then from that point, arrive home. That's about 2 hours. I mean, if you have to commute to work, right, you build that time in. Well, now if literally we show up to play, we can extend that out. Like my virtual games, we've gained an hour and a half or easily an hour additional playtime. We can go a little bit later, taking into account screen fatigue and things like that, but we can go later and end. And when you're done, you're probably at your home base or you're closer to home base. So there have been some advantages in addition to some of the more obscure role-playing systems that I enjoy. Playing virtual, it becomes very, very possible. Now, Alien the RPG versus Invisible Sun as two examples. It's been relatively easier for an obscure, or I should say non-mainstream D&D system to find players to play Alien, both virtual and tabletop. Because a lot of people, I won't say everybody, but a lot of people know the Aliens franchise. So it's very, very easy to play that. Invisible Sun, and more, I'm loving the system. I'm loving everything about it. Playing that game requires immersion, requires tabletop. There are props, there are condition cards, there are a lot of effects that help the game to move it along. I mean, I have experimented. We kind of ran a couple of games playing virtual where you saw Fritz as the GM, but then there was a dedicated second camera that I had that was set up to show the suns in play, the cards in play, and the various pieces to the game, which are an important part because they give clues that the GM is not necessarily going to talk about. And they also serve as a nexus for you as a player to see and decide, I'm going to do something with that. And it's not up to me as the GM to tell you what. It's up to you to see and say, I'm going to work with this sun of magic or this flow of magic, or I'm going to work with the invisible sun and see what we can do from that perspective. So from that example, Invisible Sun wants to have physical tabletop players, but that's been a challenge because it's a very unique system. It's not well known. You need the black cube, the obsidian cube, to play it. And to find players to do that is challenging. But as soon as I go virtual, it opens the pool up tremendously. It opens the pool up incredibly. So more and more I'm looking and saying, do I even need tabletop anymore? That's not to say I'm not going to play tabletop. That's not to say it's not my preference. But in the past, it was like, I want to be 100% tabletop, and I would not always consider playing virtual to the point where maybe I didn't get to play some games as much, right? What's better, at least playing a game and having a good time, with some concessions or a little bit of tweaks here and there, or not playing at all from that perspective. So this has been a tremendous shift as the culture accepts it more, as the tools and the tech happen more, which leads into our other question, 4th edition D&D, right? I've gone on record saying I enjoy 4th edition D&D. I continue to enjoy it and play it from time to time. But in my opinion, the big failure that was Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition was the fact that they recreated the system completely. I mean, it really doesn't play like D&D. There's familiar settings, character classes, abilities, but it was streamlined down almost to an MMO because the idea was that's what it was going to be. There was going to be this release of Dungeon Master Tools, Game Master Tools, of course, a monthly subscription that you would play virtual. The game was made to play virtual. They couldn't get those virtual tools online in time, so they went with the physical launch. They couldn't pivot because the whole system has been rebuilt, and it didn't quite resonate with the community. But the question is, and I know that's a summary, compacted summary. The question is, are we going to see role-playing games, new games, specifically written, specifically formatted to play virtual?